listening to CDKL5 in color. I'm Marissa, and on this podcast, I'm joined by my co host Amanda, and sometimes some very special guests to talk all things CDKL5 deficiency disorder. It's a rare genetic condition caused by changes in the CDKL5 gene. Patients with this condition often experience profound developmental disabilities, difficult to control seizures that start in infancy, cortical visual impairment, and a variety of other health concerns. It's a challenging condition, but we know that by sharing our stories, we can raise awareness, provide support, and paint pictures of our community that can lead to greater understanding and meaningful change for families like ours. Let's jump right in.
Hey, Amanda.
Hey, Marissa.
How are you?
I'm hanging in there. It is cold in Colorado.
No, it's cold in Connecticut too. Oof. Hopefully it'll start to warm up. I mean, it is winter, but what can you do?
Yeah, unseasonably cold, I feel like.
It is. So it's February, which means it's getting close to Rare Disease Day. We thought we'd do an episode about rare disease, and we also have some fun news about a giveaway we're running throughout the month. I had never heard the term rare disease until my son was born. Had you heard of it?
No. And with Ava being late diagnosed, I remember seeing a genetics doctor when she was an infant, and he did a whole physical exam, asked me a lot of questions, told me he'd never seen a baby with abs like hers, and told me whatever was going on was rare, and he thought it was on the X chromosome. And in 5 years, I would probably know what her diagnosis was. And it was about right on time from what he told me. So, he had mentioned he thought it was rare, but it hadn't occurred to me that there was a whole body of people out there advocating for a whole big body of disorders that are considered rare. And with that said, we did a lot of blogging back then, and I actually probably first heard of rare disease in that context when I learned about global genes, which has changed a whole lot over the years as well.
Changed how?
When Global Genes first started, what they did was solicited blogs from undiagnosed people or people living with a rare disease, trying to start the storytelling and build some kind of tools they could take and help educate policymakers and people who really needed to understand the impact of these diseases and how extremely difficult it is to do anything about it when you have patient numbers that are so low. And at that point in time, diagnosing people with rare disease was expensive and it was timely. Things have changed a lot in that regard. The Human Genome Phenome Project really revolutionized genetic diagnoses within my daughter's lifetime. So much is different from when I first started celebrating or advocating around Rare Disease Day that it's almost hard to fathom. But on the same note, we have so much more work to do and different type of work to do the more science advances. And we are looking at precision medicine and the treatments of the future.
How do you identify as a rare disease when you're undiagnosed? That seems so hard to wrap my brain around because you're undiagnosed, you don't know. So how do you know you have a rare disease?
Well, I think maybe the answer to that is science, and the ability to test and understand our genome has led us to an understanding that we should know what it is. And if we don't, it's because we haven't figured out what gene it is that's causing the issue for your loved one. But it's unbelievable. The precision in diagnoses, like they come back with a lot of different genes these days. It's really exciting to see, we can diagnose a lot of things. We are starting to be aware of a lot more patients and within these gene changing diagnoses. But we still got a long ways to go to understand the trajectory of the disease. What's the natural history? How do we find adults who have been living undiagnosed for all these years? And what can we learn from them that can, help us accelerate treatment development? So I think it's important as an undiagnosed person for almost 7 years to just remind people, if you're not diagnosed, it's never too late. It's not expensive. Your insurance is likely going to pay for it, not like 20, 30 years ago when you started these journeys. So take some time to investigate getting a diagnosis if you're still out there living life, not knowing exactly what it is you're dealing with.
Yeah. That's really interesting to think about the adults that could possibly be out there living with CDKL5 that, I don't know if we would anticipate any of them are living independently, but they might be in group home situations or, I have an uncle, he does not have CDKL5, but he lives in a group home. And I might have even said this to you like years ago. Well, how come we can't just go and test these people who live in places like my uncle and see if any of them have CDKL5 or who have anything. But then there's a whole layer of, if you're an adult who's a guardian of the state,
It's
who's going to pay for
consent,
that,
it's
who's going to consent for
IRBs.
that.
Yeah. Well, and why? What does knowing change? And I think we've come a long way there. In our children's own diagnosis, now we can say, well, we have a treatment approved for epilepsy and CDKL5. So maybe the reason you would want to test them if we suspect they have Rett syndrome or CDKL5 or any of those disorders in our umbrella, I think all of them now have some type of, treatment approved that you can try to justify testing for. But, and I've run across adults, they don't care to know. Some of it is an identity or a community they've built and they're fine. And to understand might make them really feel like they're not part of a community they've kind of built their life around. So there's a lot of emotions behind identity.
Yeah.
And I try to be respectful of that when I'm picking people's brains about why they're not diagnosed. And it's a pain to go to a hospital that can do these kinds of things, like getting into a major city hub, parking, getting your kid in, your loved one in, like all of those things are overwhelming sometimes. And they're very basic things, but those are the things that, people living with rare disease are up against every day.
Sure. It sometimes feels like what would be exciting about finding older adults with your genetic disorder is the information it could benefit for the younger people or the people who are not born yet, who could benefit from really this improved understanding of the spectrum and the natural history, and for future treatments and future interventions and things like that. It's not necessarily, I think even that now, my son is 8 and we participate in as many research things as we can with the hope that he could benefit from what's being learned. But, I think the reality is, who's really going to benefit are people that aren't even born yet, the people, the future people. Like, some of it is this sort of altruistic thing, like you're doing things for the betterment of the future too.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. The adults that I've come across with in CDKL5 that have really late diagnoses, some of them finally make it to like a multi-center care facility for adults with ID, right? Like, I think giving adults access to things that peds have is the next step in the US that we have to really think about in drug development. A lot of the Orphan Drug Disease Act, a lot of things that you see people work on, it's in peds because there are a lot of rare diseases that are fatal in the first 5 years of life. And you really need to focus on the infants. But there are so many of us who, we're learning, we are aware of CDKL5 patients well into their 60s. So, why would we not want to try to understand how to at least come up with care standards and try to better understand the trajectory and natural history of the disease as a society, right? Because this is all expensive, and the equity that we fight for in rare disease really comes down to the resources. And some of them resources are even in terms of there's not a lot of patients identified. So how do you get statistically sound science if you can't get people to participate in research? So that's a little shout out to the why you might want to participate in research that you don't think will ever come to fruition. It very well might affect your child in clinical trial development, whether they're in the trial or not. Eventually, somebody did the work for those treatments to come to market.
So thinking about the definition of rare disease, what is a rare disease? There's a definition for the US, right? And then there's sort of a global definition. In the US, a rare disease is a condition that affects fewer than 200,000 people. And Rare Disease Day is this movement around the globe uniting the thousands of rare diseases that exist to work towards equity in social opportunity and healthcare and access to diagnosis and therapies in order to change and improve the lives of the 300 million people worldwide who live with rare disease. And I'll give a shout out to rarediseaseday.org, where that information came from. 300 million people. It's incredible, isn't it? I think the statistic they put out is if you put everybody together, it would be the third largest country in the world. I'll have to check.
No, I think it is something like that. I mean, it's kind of incredible to think 1 in 4 people lives with a disability within the United States. Maybe not a rare disease, but being, disabled. It's everywhere. We just, as a society, have some work to do.
Yeah, because you don't see it. And sometimes, I have family members who technically are disabled, and I never think about that. Some of it is this
Because they can access things that they need to?
Yes,
Yeah.
because they might need some mobility help
Mhm.
or accommodations, but they're easily met, and otherwise they're living a regular life.
And things that can easily be met can sometimes still be a huge fight. So, like the indivisible disabilities where people really do need something more. I'm sort of amazed that we know so little about some of this stuff, considering how many people it affects. But it's a good day to be hopeful still, to hope that us coming together and demanding a different tomorrow is really starting. The work that has been put in is becoming it's realized. It might not be quickly realized, but we do have a lot that's happened in drug development in the last 5 years that would have never been possible without advocacy legislation that was put together. It was the Orphan Disease Act. And that kind of set up a framework for the FDA to guide drug developers and give them incentives to work on developing treatments for these populations that are challenging for many reasons. Giving people access to priority vouchers was one thing that's really changed the landscape in the last 5 years. We're back to having to work on that again because it went away. I don't think ganaxolone would have made it to market if the priority voucher hadn't have been there to incentivize Marinus to develop a drug for a rare population.
So let's talk about equity, because that word is really at the forefront of what Rare Disease Day is all about advocating for.
I think there's like 3 pillars of equity they talk about. And one of them is what we were just kind of chatting about. It's in treatment development. It's in trying to level the playing field to give these disease states access to, a chance to have a treatment developed, which would mean giving these pharmaceutical companies and industry some carrots, some reasons to want to develop that. It's also getting the clinical research together that pharmaceutical companies need to develop a drug, like what is CDKL5? What does it do in our body? What could we do to maybe alleviate some symptoms based on what we know about CDKL5? How many patients are out there? How many patients can go and do research? Being research ready is, we need to do a whole podcast on that and why we participate in research and what it means to be ready to participate in research. But it is extremely hard to live with CDKL5 deficiency. So when you go into long longitudinal studies to try to better understand CDKL5, we're finding there's a lot of challenges in, getting those completed with robust numbers. And it's not for lack of trying on anyone's part. It costs a lot of money. You need a certain number of patients, and you need to retain those patients to the end of those studies. And for many reasons, that's a challenge. There's a lot of reasons patients don't make it to the end, and it's hard to fix something that you can't define. And that's what happens when you discover a gene and have 30 patients, which is kind of where CDKL5 started, right? We're about 20 years into them understanding that it caused this particular disease that, our children live with. But we still have a lot of work to understand, what does it? We don't understand biologically what all is going on, let alone what is the phenotype? What kind of a spectrum of patients do we have in CDKL5? And how long do they live? And what does adulthood look like? And what are challenges we don't even think about in peds that might come up later in life? So um, equity in treatment and development is, you can see that it's a lot of money and time for people to try to understand these small disease states to help them improve. And it's on us to kind of drive that, to be that driving force.
That goes along with equity in access to healthcare.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, if you can't receive a diagnosis, you can't participate in research or get a treatment that's already been approved that would alleviate the 15 other treatments you tried first. So I'd like to hope that in the US, getting a diagnosis is not quite as cumbersome as it used to be. But I do feel like there are plenty of people in healthcare deserts, they call them, where they're just being managed and probably not managed well. And they may not even have any idea that there's like a simple blood test that they could do that might give people some ideas on where to go next, even if it doesn't tell you exactly what's going on.
right.
So, and we have telehealth now. There's so many things I think to be hopeful about and to advocate for. Hopefully we figure out how to get everybody access to that subset of specialists.
Well, that's the thing, right? Like, even if you do have a diagnosis, that doesn't necessarily mean you have access to anybody who knows anything about it.
Oh, yeah. You're exactly right. I mean, I'm in Denver. To see my own kid's neurologist can be 9 months out. So that's me in a hub that has this big CDKL5 center that's full of regenerative medicine and research. And I know people who drive hours from surrounding states, Montana to New Mexico, over in Nebraska and Kansas. Like, we have people that come from 7 or 8 states to see providers for annual care, to see just an epileptologist. So, the adult landscape is even worse, because if you're a nonverbal adult, they will deal with your epilepsy, but they're not going to deal with the, behaviors that are comorbidity to the epilepsy. And so, anyways, we have a very specialized healthcare system in the States. And in some ways, that's brought some great avenues to go get neurological care, but in other ways it's really boxed people out of having access to anything, because your primary physician doesn't have the capacity sometimes to even know where to send you.
And in the United States, we have 10 centers of excellence that are specific to CDKL5. But if you don't live within a reasonable distance to get to one, or you don't have access to Medicaid or other programs that might help you pay to make that journey, there's all these barriers to
Yeah.
seeing the people who are specialists in this disease in this
Yeah.
country.
And I mean, paying out of pocket, we're talking thousands of dollars to walk
Oh,
into
yeah.
one of these institutions and spend, 20 minutes with a specialist. And it's not the doctor's fault. I always just like to say that, because I think some people get really upset, and I'm like, they work for one of these big corporations I just mentioned earlier. We're all kind of in this cog of somebody's got to make money, and we're trying our best to be good humans and do what we can for people who need help. Like, I've never come across a rare disease specialist who isn't just compassionate and wants to fix it all. It's just
Mhm.
a lot to fix.
Yeah. And that's where being able to have publications and other things that can be read by anybody, no matter where they are, is at least something that can
Yes.
give neurologists or local doctors a chance to
Chance.
make
Well,
sense of something.
yeah. And they may not be able to make sense of a specialized paper, but they can at least then make sense of what they're dealing with and who they can go ask for help, or where they can try to advocate to get patients. Back when I was trying to get Ava diagnosed, you could actually try to get into the NIH, and in Bethesda, they have an undiagnosed disease program there. I would hope that they see less and less requests because we're so good at whole exome sequencing now. But anyhow.
Yeah.
I have this question, Marissa, that I like everybody to talk about at the end of our podcast. Where are your unmet needs? And I feel like almost everyone we've asked that to date has come back to having some kind of equity in accessing social systems, whether that's having a caretaker who is consistent and can stay at home with their kiddo while they go out and do the things they can't do with their CDKL5 child, or it is having somebody who can come along with them so they can fully participate in what they're doing while this person is caretaking, right? So equity in social systems is another thing we're advocating for when we're talking about Rare Disease Day. And that's very broad, and it's also can be local, very local, what you don't have and need. But at the end of the day, we have to work towards more equity in our social systems. Our kids have IEPs at school. It's not perfect, but before IEPs, they didn't even have to take them at school, or they didn't have to do anything with them at school. I think about adults who don't have access to wheelchairs that they can put on a bus and get to where they're going for healthcare. I think about research, and I think about, why are we so rigid when we have so many tools to go into people's houses? Why can't we start using telehealth and, traveling doctors or nurses to go in and help facilitate some of these long-term studies with some of these patients? I still think we could start thinking about training neurologists who do nothing but help facilitate treatments within patients' homes across the U.S.
Wouldn't that be fabulous? We
Yep.
just got back. We spent the entire day yesterday traveling to a clinical trial appointment out of state. It's a 3-hour drive out and a 3-hour drive back, and we do it in one day. Even though the study site would pay for us to stay overnight, staying overnight, I almost want to laugh.
Yeah.
It's so much harder to try and stay overnight. So we do it in one day. It is a long day. And my son, when he's not in a great spot with his respiratory status, like sometimes he has these seizures where he's needing oxygen. He's aspirated on his saliva during the seizure. He's needing oxygen until he can get his alertness back and cough and clear. But that means traveling with enough oxygen to be able to make the ride if he needed to be on it the entire ride. Thinking about all that it takes to get us to go somewhere. I can't take him by myself. So usually my mother, who's in her 70s, will go with me. But my husband went with me yesterday, but he took the day off of work and we made the trip down, and it's a lot. It's packing. It's packing for every worst case scenario because you don't want to get somewhere and realize, oh no, I had something at home that I really needed that I didn't bring.
Yeah, and it's not
And
because you can't run down to the shop and buy it,
no,
right? I mean, I think that's what some people are like. It's like we're not getting this stuff on the fly, It's not like
right.
forgetting a
It's not
water
like,
bottle or something.
yeah, or you forgot diapers and you're going to go to Walmart. No,
Mhm. Mm-mm.
he doesn't fit in those diapers anymore. No, it's stressful, but it's worth it. I mean, I'll be the first to say, participating in something, especially if that thing is helping your kid, it's so worth it. It's so worth it. But
Mhm.
yes, more telehealth, please. Half telehealth visits, half in person, anything, any
Yeah.
sort of give and take would make the whole process a lot easier for us. And actually, what I would love is when my son is sick with like a regular cold at home and he's on oxygen at home and he's got a fever, or he's in a situation where I really need to take him to be seen at the pediatrician. We're not quite at the level where we need to go to the hospital, but he does
Right.
need to see somebody.
Right.
To pack up my sick son who's got a fever and is on oxygen, to take him to the pediatrician to be listened to his lungs and whatever else they're going to do. Wouldn't it be amazing if you could call a traveling pediatrician to come to your house and assess your care? Traveling nurse, come to my house. Why do I have to take my kid with all of this equipment while he's sick to the doctor? Can't someone come listen to his chest and do an ear look in his ears at my house? That would be amazing.
Yeah. Medicare actually pays for that in the geriatric population, so it's something we can work on. But that
That would
is a
be
very good point.
incredible.
Well, and then you go into I don't care if you're in the ED or a pediatric. I mean, it's just a cesspool of other sick people,
Oh,
and you
right. Yeah.
risk
No,
picking
you're
up 3 or 4 other.
exactly
The just a virus is what I call it. I'm not gonna go get diagnosed with just a virus if I can
right.
if I
Yeah.
can avoid it, because I might pick up 2 or 3 others while we're there. When we pack all of this stuff up and take our kids to these large institutions and we're stressed out and everybody's out of the norm of their daily routine, it's really not a good picture. Observationally speaking and clinical research, like, you're not getting what these kids can do. They have a lot of wait time, they have vision, sensory. It would just be so much better if they could watch me at home. I'll be reporting the same things, but do you want to see it? Here's my loved one doing this in their home environment. And I know clinicians really understand that and respect that. It's just more trying to get the people who do the statistics and design the trials to appreciate it, and for us all to come to some consensus on how do we capture this in a way that that works. Right? We're trying this in our own disease state a little bit.
Yeah. So I was going to
But
say, we've had an opportunity to practice getting that picture from home, doing the home video study with Dr. Leonard and Dr. Downs and
Telethon Kids team.
Telephone Kids team, to really show what our kids can do in the environment where they're used to doing it.
Yeah. And, really thanks to them doing parent questionnaires and doing some of that epidemiology work that can be done from home. We have a whole lot of papers, and the world knows a whole lot more about CDKL5 than many other rare diseases. So just another shout out to why research is important and how there are likely ways you can get involved in research at home that doesn't involve traveling and discomfort.
Well, and I think advocacy for the voucher programs and things, those are really federal levels of impact.
Even
But
Medicaid.
mhm. But a lot of the things that we need really need to be advocated for at our state level. And it's important to really get involved if you can, if you're interested. And one way I wanted to share for people who are not familiar that they could get involved with more local advocacy is through their state's Rare Action Network. So Rare Action Networks are a product of the National Organization for Rare Disorders, NORD. Their goal is to ensure that the rare disease community is represented and supported, and in all 50 states. And they engage rare communities to take action through policy, through awareness, through education initiatives in their state and local communities. And I'm going to link their website in the show notes. There you can find the rare disease ambassadors from your state. All 50 states have ambassadors. So these are people who are affiliated with rare disease that you can reach out to and talk to them about how you can get involved in your state to promote advocacy for rare diseases. Our Rare Action Network in Connecticut had an initiative that they were working a couple of years ago about expanding the Katie Beckett waiver program in our state. And I was able to participate with them to make our story heard. I wanted to travel. They were speaking at the Capitol in person. I really wanted to go and share my testimony in person, but my son was really unwell at the time. I don't have backup caregiving unless I was going to ask my husband to take the day off from work. And that's a barrier, I think, for a lot of people to be able to share their story, but they accommodated my need to provide written testimony, and that was shared, just not by me. So I appreciated at least being able to participate in some way.
I have a local project, Colorado Rare. It's a nonprofit that I come together with a few other local moms to form many years ago because things like the Rare Action Network were definitely not every state had one. And as a matter of fact, like our children's hospital has a lot of patient advocacy type boards, and they were not really even dealing with rare diseases yet either. So we kind of came together as a parent force, made this nonprofit, and we used it to get support from places like NORD and Every Life is someone else who kind of came along, and Global Genes, actually. We were kind of a place where they could support us, and we organized a day at the Capitol on Rare Disease Day. And we would get, like Tim Benke would come and testify with us, and we could talk about why lawmakers should be aware of this kind of stuff. And it never underestimate that, because the conversations I had in hallways it was unbelievable how far removed they are from what's going on and what they're trying to make decisions about. I promise you, if you get in touch with your local representative, there is work in your state, and it might not impact your child's particular disease or your loved ones. I will stop saying child, but any win in rare disease legislation is a kind of a win for us all, because we can go back and use that framework to try to push other initiatives ahead. Also, these folks are watching out for our best interest, and they're alerting us, right? So if you ever get involved with one of these organizations and you get asked to testify or to reach out to your lawmakers, like, do it. You'll be surprised how you can forge some relationships with people that you elected, very local politicians. They'll try to help you. Once you go and share your story and tell them why you want what you want and how it will impact society, they'll likely get on board with you. So get in touch with Rare Action and watch your other, your school board sometimes is a place where you can go advocate for your child and access to things that maybe aren't happening.
Absolutely. And none of it is ever going to be about CDKL5, right? I mean,
No.
these things that you're getting involved in, they are to support kids with people with medical needs, medical complexities, disabilities, educational needs, healthcare needs.
Yep.
They're to support everyone, right?
They're to support everyone, and it's money, right? They're getting money, whether it's for research, whether it's making people give you drugs at a certain price point. And it's also, how do we all of this stuff is very expensive in rare disease. So how do we pay for a $5 million genetic treatment for one disorder and then have this other disorder that has, there's a lot of economic policy that is considered, and everybody deserves a chance to tell their story and to advocate for a piece of that pie. And if you don't, you will be left behind. So advocate broadly, because one day these same people will be there to help you get what you need across the line.
They'll be so happy for you to reach out. I guarantee it. Your Rare Action ambassadors, they will love to get your email.
Yeah, and even if there's not anything to do immediately, there will be things to do. You'll understand, you'll get more acquainted with your legislative process within your own state, because they're all on different timelines and do things a little bit different.
Right. And it's the whole idea of strength in numbers, right? I think that's going back to Rare Disease Day. It's a global initiative. It's a unification of these 300 million people around the world, because there is strength in numbers to say, hey, this is a group that needs attention. Look how many of us there are, regardless of the individual disease state.
It's not that these problems aren't solvable. It's what kind of resources do we have to allocate to solving them? That's what we're working for. Like, we're trying to get the resources to help get front and center. And we can't do it alone. I mean, I know that sounds so it's always, but we can't do it alone. Nobody has the money, the time, the knowledge.
Really. One thing that's special that happens on Rare Disease Day is the Global Chain of Lights. So that takes place at 7 p.m. your local time on February 28th, which is Rare Disease Day. Rare Disease Day is always the last day in February. So usually it's the 28th, but sometimes it happens to be the 29th. This year it's the 28th. So 7 p.m. your local time. It's really fun if you watch the Rare Disease Day social media. They have their own Facebook, Instagram pages. They say, it's Rare Disease Day in Angola. It's Rare Disease Day in, wherever. The chain of lights goes all the way around the world. So I wanted to share with everyone about a giveaway we're doing. We are giving away a candle. It's really sweet. It says CDKL5 Illuminate Hope. There are 2 designs of the candle, so you'll be able to choose. One is a CDKL5 green and epilepsy purple design, and the other is a rare zebra print CDKL5 design, a play off of the zebra mascot for rare disease. Either candle is a perfect way to light it up for CDKL5 on Rare Disease Day or during June Awareness Month or any other time during the year. The way you enter is you'll go to our social media, follow or like our pages, and tag a friend who might be interested in listening to our podcast. You'll also have bonus entries for signing up for our newsletter. I'm going to put that link in the show notes. I hope everyone goes ahead and signs up for our newsletter. And bonus entries for writing a review of our podcast on Apple Podcasts or putting a review on our Facebook page. Either one would be much appreciated. We're going to promote this all month long. We'll pick 2 winners, a Facebook winner and an Instagram winner, on Rare Disease Day, which is February 28th. And we're doing this so that we can increase our reach of our podcast. We've had a really great response to our podcast so far. I'm so excited. We've gotten lots of really touching comments that people have sent to me in Messenger, some really nice reviews on our Apple Podcasts. And we want to get it out there so that more and more people are able to listen, especially people who are affiliated with CDKL5 that haven't checked in yet or haven't listened yet. So your participation in our giveaway will help us increase our reach for the podcast, and we would very much appreciate that. And you could possibly win this really sweet candle. And if you don't win, I'll put a plug that you could also purchase one of these candles in our new shop.
Well, and we have one other fun thing. If you're going to go and check out the website, recently added a way for you to record a voice message to send to us. So if something strikes you about this episode that you want to share about rare disease or your experience, like, try it out. Drop us a line, like, literally speak to us.
Yeah. Send us a voice message. We might even use it on the show.
Yeah.
To share other people's thoughts and ideas. We really want this to be a community podcast where it's not just our voices, but there's lots of voices heard. So yeah, give us a shout out on our recorded line about Rare Disease Day or about CDKL5, anything. Ask us a question and we'll get it out there. Well, I hope this is helpful. Like I said before, I had never even heard the term rare disease. So for people who are new to CDKL5 or to learn a little bit about what rare disease is, to get informed about Rare Disease Day. Hopefully this has been helpful. The links of the things that we've talked about will be in the show notes. Get in touch with your Rare Action Network if you're interested.
Yeah, and I'll add, Rare Disease Day is a great model to understand why we advocate and how we advocate. Yes, it's broad, but if you really want to dip your toes into policy advocacy, anything surrounding this day is a great way to start.
Awesome.
Also, be sure to check the show notes for some additional ways to get involved that we didn't mention on the podcast.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks, Marissa. It was good seeing you today.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. We hope you'll follow us on social media at CDKL5 in color on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and visit us online at www.cdkl5incolor.com. Have questions? or a topic you'd like us to chat about? Would you like to be a guest on our podcast? Email us, CDKL5incolor@gmail.com, and we'll be in touch. Until next time.